It's my natural kind of calling, obviously, is to be the voice of a diarrhea treatment.
Rue, start the show! I'm Beatrice, your badass branding strategy girl, and welcome to the Art of Branding Badassery podcast. Rue expects your best branding game. You don't want to miss out on 95% of your audience, do you? Hold on to your vocal cords, peeps, because we've got on a voice that's more recognizable than your morning alarm to talk about nailing your brand voice. Okay, it's not Morgan Freeman. It's the actor and voice actor who's got the art of looking like he's going to cry in many of his LinkedIn videos down. Plus, having worked with the likes of Google, BMW, and Warner Brothers, move over Cumberpatch. Our guest today is none other than Chris Tester. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Beatrice. Thank you.
My pleasure. So, Chris, what is this that I hear about you aiming to be a golf pro in your past life? What drove you from golf course to recording booth?
Yeah, just in case you thought I was any less white, middle class, and privileged. I originally, because it all goes back to, and this is where I get, the tear-jerking origin story in really, really super fast, is that I was born with a hole in the heart. And as a result of being born with a hole in the heart, I couldn't be operated on until I was 1 year old. And as a result of that, physically, I wasn't very active at all. And I kind of grew up comparatively isolated. Then was a bit, so that's my excuse for being a bit of a loner, generally speaking. And then what kind of sport would a very unsporty child be attracted to? Well, something like golf, where you're literally in the middle of a field with no one else around you, apart from, typically middle-aged men hiding their midlife crisis through kind of Technicolor sportswear. Yeah, so I found that was my bizarre kind of sport of choice. My parents didn't play it. The whole kind of cultural thing around golf in the UK is absolutely horrendous. They're all horrific, but I really enjoyed. It was the first sport that I really enjoyed kind of playing, and I took it incredibly seriously. It's also the kind of sport that you can practice on your own. So up until the age of about 14, 15, that was my thing. That was the thing that I was going to be.
Yeah.
I got pretty good. I got down to a professional, a handicap of about 3, so 3 shots off, kind of like a professional.
Yeah.
And then kind of had the realization that there were people who were just much more talented than me, who literally didn't do any of the hours that I did, who would sometimes apparently kind of just walk onto the course and hit things brilliantly that I could never, far more further, more accurate than I ever could. And so that was my first big kind of realization of oh, okay, there are certain things that you can make up with hard work and determination and work ethic and all of this kind of thing. But there are also certain things which are a bit non-negotiable. And so that's when that dream died. But I mean, it's something I haven't picked up a golf court or a golf club in even anger for about 20 years. But it did teach me a lot about, just finding that satisfaction in working on yourself and, working on a craft, ideally, because golf kind of stuff is incredibly technical, or I found it incredibly technical, for better or worse, anyway. So I just loved having that thing that I felt that I could work on whenever I wanted to and kind of push my passion through. And so, yeah, that was my dream. And then that very quickly got supplanted by, well, if not golf, then obviously acting is the next thing. A lot of golfers start out as actors, obviously, and then they just kind of gravitate to the golf course and vice versa. It's a very well-established association. Yeah. And so I mean, so that was more to do with my mum specifically. She used to teach English and drama, and she was always very much passionate about that. So I was dragged along to various plays from an early age, and yeah, and so around about that time, around about 13, 14, is when I saw the first kind of shows that really kind of gripped me and kind of emotionally connected with me in a way that I, certainly golf or nothing else had managed to kind of like before. And that's the reason why I decided to realign myself with something else. And also the benefits of acting is that it's a lot more subjective. So you literally can't just say, well, that person is just much, much better than me. At certain kind of like standards, it's much more in the eye and ear of the beholder to a degree. But it's something that, and as soon as I started doing, I started enjoying it. And that meant I got better at it more quickly. And it kind of like built from there, I suppose.
Hell yeah. So speaking of building, how did you start to build your brand voice? I mean, what's the story there?
So I would say, so I started out just purely as an actor, as opposed to a voice actor. And I went to drama school in the UK at a place called the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. And I graduated in 2008. And I mainly did stage work. And that was partly because it was my passion. And it was also partly because I just never really got auditions for TV and film. And kind of like thought a little bit about voiceover, but it's the type of thing that people over there do it because they've got the right agents to get them work, and that's what I assumed. And then I did a short course, which actually taught me that, people could set up at home and actually, have recording setups that they have in their own house, which wouldn't cost hundreds or thousands of pounds. And so I did that course and I had a little bit of a play around, and that's where I kind of like started, importantly. And one of the first things about kind of like starting a kind of like a business, obviously, is how are you going to stand out from all of the rest of the competition? Yeah. And it's weird because as actors, generally with actors, you try and present yourself almost as like a clean slate, because then people can project whatever it is they need from you onto you to a degree. So, I mean, that was taken to an extreme at my drama school at Central, because it was like everybody had to wear black. Because it was all about the neutrality of the physicality. So you couldn't hide. You couldn't hide behind your haircut or your piercings or whatever. Fuck. So whereas now, I think they probably more go like, oh, it's what makes you individual and you and memorable, and so they'd really lean into that thing. But anyway, at my time, it was all about the neutrality. So you could just be a receptacle to the work or something equally fancy sounding. And I was just like. And I looked at the other voice actors that were out there, and they're all doing the same thing, and they're all kind of posing with their microphones, going like that or whatever. Yeah. And I was just like, I mean, that's not going to work. I don't think it's going to work. So I decided to lean ridiculously heavily on the first kind of bits of work that came my way, which tended to be very corporate stuff. Corporate stuff has different associations, but, I'm talking like business to business and business to consumer kind of like stuff. But whether that's explainer videos or kind of like hero movies about this is what our company does for you, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that whole kind of professional business side that kind of came to me because of just how I sound. And so I thought I would lean heavily into that with a brand which wasn't just my name, but was naturally RP. RP being received pronunciation, which is essentially kind of like a Southern English neutral. It's a bit like the Queen's English. It's a bit like, the old kind of like BBC style, though that's tends to be a little bit more heightened, but that's the associations with it. And, I got dressed in a suit and I have a teacup, and I still have it to this day on my website and all of my branding. It's the guy with the suit and the teacup. And, there's a certain color scheme that goes with it of blue and white and gray, which is all about, purity and professionalism and reliability and masculinity and whatever the hell else you want to read into it. But that was my way of kind of creating a brand and a brand voice that was more memorable. And that seemed to work for me from an early stage. Obviously, as I've developed, I've continued to adapt that. But my thing about, these brands is that it needs to be a catalyst. I need you to make a decision about me. The worst thing is for you to feel indifferent about what it is that I'm projecting to you. You may love it or you may hate it, but if you feel something about it, that's obviously going to be much better than like, So that's why I decided to lean very heavily into that. That seems to have served me quite well. Famous last words.
And so how is it that you make them feel something? Is it in the suit, the attire, or?
I mean, I think in terms of the brand, there are certain associations in terms of the just purely the branding aspect of it, of kind of like professionalism, trustworthiness, clarity, authority, which are all kind of innate things that my voice just kind of gives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I kind of get that for free. I don't need to try that because just by speaking, people hear that to a degree. And obviously there is some acting involved depending upon the message that you're communicating, but that's kind of like the main core offering as it is. And then off the back of that, it's trying to kind of like break out and riff with it. So for example, I also do loads of video game work.
Exactly.
Which is not what you would associate the whole corporate teacup thing with. That's not a trustworthy person who's very responsible and takes everything kind of like seriously, blah 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 blah. So my way around that is that, I grew up playing, 8-bit games with kind of like pixel art, like Zelda or whatever. And I like took my brand photo and I got someone to pixelate it like a video game character. So it's kind of like you take that initial kind of idea and then you shape it in a slightly different way. And again, some people might go like, yeah, but no one's going to hire a guy in a suit to play some evil kind of like demon. Well, I'm here to say that they do. Quite often. Maybe those associations with people in suits being in some way kind of like demonic, that might be an appropriate connection. I don't know. But that was my way of standing out. And I think it's also partly because, you see it in every way in terms of like, such as on LinkedIn, people are encouraged to tap into their individuality.
Yeah.
It's more greatly celebrated, as it should be, so to make you kind of like stand out and memorable, so people get to know, like, and trust you. How I try and handle it is that if you actually spend any time with my content at all, is that there's a deliberate tension. There's a tension between corporate guy and cry man in the videos, or hyper emotional person in the thing, or person who's like at least 2/3 of my content involve my cat in some way.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like, so it makes people go like, what the fuck? But hopefully in an intriguing way. And that still seems to serve me better than just like, hey, it's just me. I'm just another voiceover guy. I can be whoever you want me to be, kind of thing. Because first of all, that's not my skill set. And secondly, I just don't think it stands out in the same kind of way. Because my whole tension is obviously, as we were saying before we started recording, was that, yes, I've got to be these brand voices for other people and take on board what they want from me. So that does sometimes require me to be a clean slate. But that clean slate aspect does me no favors in terms of my own marketing, in terms of actually getting out there and doing stuff. And so I think it's quite interesting to explore that tension between, he's projecting as one thing, but it's also something else. If you decide to actually kind of like dig deeper into my content, what I'm not doing is videos of me doing corporate narration while stressed in a suit. Because that, I think, that's hilarious, but I don't think necessarily in a good way. Whereas I think hopefully people kind of like, people engage with humor. Humor and humanizations. And again, in terms of the actual day job of doing voiceover as well, what increasingly I find most satisfying and most successful to do is when it's not just those really earnest, we need you to feel things because things are important because we're all alone here, aren't we? It's not those kind of things, but those things where either you show vulnerability or humor or a combination of the two.
Exactly.
That's what it's that vulnerability or variance in tone that actually draws people in. And so yeah, I want to kind of fuck with that essentially.
I really love that, how you've built that brand around you in the suit, right? And shifted that to like, the gaming side of like with the pixels. So what would you recommend for businesses to add their own dynamic selves to their voice and not confuse the audience?
Yeah, sure. I think having a very clear idea, first of all, about what your role is to the listener, to the audience, is like the huge thing. For example, I was doing a commercial and this shows how glamorous my life is. I was doing a commercial for a brand which will remain unnamed, but was marketing for basically help with diarrhea. It's my natural kind of calling, obviously, is to be the voice of a diarrhea treatment. But anyway, and there was a really interesting tension between the two other creatives that were in the session with me. One who was kind of like all about this needs to be fun and interesting. And, when you talk about having wind, I need to really hear you struggling with the wind in your voice. I was like, right. Okay, I mean, I can do that. This is absolutely fine. I'm going to turn the camera off before I do fucking anything. But yeah, sure, great. Oh, I'm really? Yeah, okay. Yeah, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, of course, I'm an actor. I can improvise. It's fantastic. And then the other side, who was just like, no. What our brand voice is and what our connection is, it's this kind of natural sound that you have, Chris, which isn't voiceover, but it's calm and soothing and reassuring. And what it basically boiled down to is the role that you have with the audience. So they were talking very much in terms of, we want it heightened and energetic, and we want it cool and soothing. And I was like, just to kind of like clarify in terms of the role with the audience, the heightened and energetic is like an empathetic friend who also is suffering from wind and diarrhea too. Okay, fine. It's like, oh, mate, yeah, fine. That's one way of doing it. The cool, which you're focusing on the sound now as opposed to the message, which is a very important distinction. Whereas the sound that you're looking for the other one is the voice of the calming professional who probably doesn't have wind because they take this regularly if they actually kind of like need it, but it's the voice of kind of authority. So it's like a doctor. And I was like, so taking it out of these abstracts of style, and in terms of the relationship with your audience, and then I did take a slightly authoritative tone when I was saying this, and I don't normally do this with clients, I hasten to add, because, my God, I'm just a paid talent to turn up, do my thing, and then fuck off. But I was just kind of like, so which fits more with your brand? Do you want to be the doctor, the professional, or do you want to be the maid? And they were like, we're the professional. I was like, okay, so then it's this style. And the other guy was like, oh, please, I need more wind. Was like, shit, yeah. Okay, right, fine. And then it's kind of like, okay, but other aspects of that comedic thing, why do you want that? Because it's more human. It's more potential to be fun or engaging and anything else like that. So is the potential for the doctor to go, yeah, we know talking about wind is embarrassing. Do you want some opportunities? Oh, even the doctor is in on it a little bit. So, and even if that's just in a question of like, with one of the really bad symptoms, I just come in a little bit more on the mic and say even that. And then, go back into my kind of like tone. Then that's fine. But you've got a very clear idea of who your audience is and how you want to speak to them first and foremost. And then you can go, what are the main emotions that I want them to feel? So it's reassurance, it's calming, you're not going to waste your money, you're not going to need anything else at all. Not, oh mate, yeah, we all get it, really, that kind of thing. But also you want that human touch, so you want to have that comedic or vulnerable moment in that. Now, disclaimer, that I recorded loads of different things, and then I'm sure it'll go up the tree and it'll be a version that I don't understand in terms of artistic choices. That's not my purview, essentially. That mine is to give people options if they want options. But it's that important thing of kind of like going, be very clear about what your role is. Be very clear about what the 2 or 3 kind of like core emotions are. But then see, is there any way that you can inject either humor or vulnerability or a sense of surprise to it for it to become more memorable? Because we're all so desensitized by advertising at the moment now, and especially with brands. That's why so many people are hiring influencers, because they can kind of piggyback off the back of their personalities. And so the brand doesn't have to have their own. They get it by association. So another way around that to do it is to kind of like, okay, well, how can we fuck with it a little bit? How can we, just kind of like riff on it in an interesting way? So that's one aspect. I mean, I would again stress, like 9 times out of 10, they say, we want it like this. And I go, great. And I do it like that about 3 times and they go, amazing. And then they applaud me and pay their invoice instantaneously. sometimes. And, that's how, life as a service provider is. But for those people who are open and willing to have a more kind of creative conversation about
Yeah.
what the brand voice is, because very often people will say, we want this brand voice to sound whatever. And maybe that's because they've listened to Morgan Freeman or somebody else for far too long. But they've got the idea of the sound, but not necessarily the emotions. So that's where it's my obligation to find those windows for a bit more of a human connection in.
Yeah. So it's about finding what you want your voice to sound like and understanding your audience, as in what emotions you want them to have.
Yeah, exactly. And being aware, obviously, that, different voices and different accents will read very, very, very differently. It's one thing, like I would say 10 years ago, my voice would be great for banks because, 20 years ago, my voice would be great for banks because I'm the white middle class businessman kind of like voice telling you what to do with your money. I think now, various recessions and banking crises notwithstanding, there's a bit less distrust. There's a bit more distrust. So very often, and listen to it now, like the people that are selling you the banking stuff, they usually have regional accents because they're less of a threat. Because they're a bit more like people like you, or whatever. I get it, or quite often with technology stuff, there's just a greater diversity of voices, which there definitely needs to be. But it's also to do with associations that people might have, and I know that some people have very positive connotations with someone that speaks in my way and with my voice. And then I also know that there are people who go like, that's the voice of oppression. Or, that's the voice of a whole other thing that needs kind of like unpicking. So it's handling it with that kind of like awareness and basing that rather than going like, well, we've got to be diverse for the sake of being diverse. It's to do with like, how are we going to make our brand relatable? And so, that's where that greater diversity is kind of like in me, because I do some accents, but essentially my voice is part of my kind of selling thing. That's why I get around it by doing lots of other content, which is either me crying or being more vulnerable or doing, not just me crying, I hasten to add for anybody who hasn't watched my content, but, me doing kind of like acting and kind of creative stuff in that respect, rather than going, ooh, how does my voice sound? Isn't it nice? Because that shit gets old quick.
I freaking love that, and having that diversity. And there's one question that I ask everyone that comes on this show, and that is, what's the biggest societal norm that you want to push back on and teach others about in general?
The biggest societal norm. I don't know. I think. I think one big thing at the moment now for me, that in terms of like a transition in myself has kind of undergone, is this whole idea of the goals that you set yourself. And these huge aspirations and dreams that you have, and that we're encouraged to be whatever that we want to be from an early age, like a golf pro or whatever. And the flip side that I see to that kind of psychology or that kind of mindset sometimes is that if it doesn't work, then how do you emotionally cope and adapt and change course? And without going, I don't meditate or anything like that, but in terms of trying to focus as much on the journey and that kind of like human element on a day-to-day kind of like basis, rather than you are your dreams purely, entirely. I think that's as kind of socio-political as I'm probably going to dare to get on this. But it's trying to find that kind of mind adjustment so that we don't conflate ourselves with our achievements, especially on social media, where that is amplified because it's all about, I earn this much, or my takings are this much, or I've just worked with this brand, and blah, 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 and all of those kind of things, which is not good for anybody's mental health.
Exactly.
But at the same time, you don't want to be like, oh, don't brag, we're all the same, really. It's like, yeah, that's a cop-out as well. I'll use other people's achievement as a fuel for my own, ego, like, well, if they can do it, then so can I, and all of that kind of stuff. But I think in terms of like, just trying to find that thing that you can do and work on and shape and enjoy working on kind of like daily, as and when and if possible, I think is only increasingly important. And I think as technology gets more and more advanced in an ideal world, it would be, the technology replacing more and more of those tasks that we don't want to do, so that we can focus on the more creative and, emotionally fulfilling stuff for ourselves. I mean, easier said than done, but that would be my thing.
Thanks. Yeah, that is a fine balance. Well, thank you again for joining, Chris. And how can people reach you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on my website, naturallyrp.co.uk. My email is there, or if people just want to drop me a DM and that kind of stuff, then I will, of course, respond.
Thank you. So those details will also be in the episode description, and drop any questions you'd like answered about this show in the comments. And of course, stay badass.